Sherlock Holmes sat in his study, the light from the fireplace flickering against the dimly lit room. The city outside had long since descended into darkness, but for Holmes, the night was his domain. His keen eyes were fixed on the pile of case files that had accumulated over the past week, yet his mind seemed far from the mundane. His violin lay on the mantelpiece untouched. Watson, ever the perceptive companion, was buried in a book in the corner, but even he could sense that his friend's thoughts were elsewhere. It was in this moment of quiet reflection that the letter arrived, cutting through the stillness like a sudden gust of wind. A single knock on the door drew Watson's attention. He rose, half expecting it to be another courier or perhaps some other minor errand. However, this time the messenger was different. The man who entered was tall, with dark, disheveled hair and a look of urgency in his eyes. "I have a letter from Mr. Holmes," he said, his voice low, almost as if speaking in code. Holmes didn't look up at first, but his sharp instinct told him there was something off about the man. As Watson accepted the letter and handed it to Holmes, he could see the slight tension in the air. Holmes raised an eyebrow as he scanned the letter's ornate seal. It was an unfamiliar crest embossed in deep crimson wax. With swift precision, he broke the seal and unfolded the parchment, his eyes scanning the elegant handwriting. "Dear Mr. Holmes, I trust this letter finds you in good health. I write to you with a matter of utmost urgency, one that requires the attention of someone with your particular skill set. There has been a crime in New York City, one that will baffle the local authorities and one that I believe you are uniquely qualified to solve. I am certain that the details of the case will intrigue you. It is a case that seems simple on the surface, yet, I fear, is far from it. A murder has occurred. A man of considerable wealth and influence whose demise holds implications far greater than the obvious. I would appreciate your assistance in this matter. Should you choose to accept this invitation, I will have an associate waiting for you at the docks in Manhattan on the 15th of the month at 2 p.m. His name is Edward Hargrave. Do not make the mistake of ignoring this request. The clock is ticking. Yours sincerely, Dahlia Marlowe." Holmes's face was impassive as he finished reading, though Watson could see the subtle shift in his demeanor. His fingers tightened around the edges of the letter, as though weighing its significance. "Watson, this letter is not a mere request. It is a challenge," Holmes murmured, his voice laced with an excitement Watson had not heard in quite some time. "A murder in Manhattan, you say? And an invitation that is too specific to ignore. A man of wealth and influence, these are often the cases that hide the most secrets. I take it you're not planning to let this opportunity pass?" Watson said, unable to suppress a grin. He knew that once Holmes had caught the scent of a mystery, there was no pulling him away. "No, indeed," Holmes replied, folding the letter with careful precision. He placed it back into the envelope, his mind already racing with possibilities. "We are going to Manhattan, Watson. The game is afoot." The following days were a blur of preparation. Holmes, ever methodical, packed only what he deemed essential for the journey. A few tools of his trade, his magnifying glass, a small notebook for observations, and, of course, his ever-present violin. Watson, on the other hand, packed with his usual thoroughness, though he seemed less affected by the urgency of the case. The prospect of traveling to New York was an adventure in itself, and he couldn't help but wonder about the peculiarities of the case that awaited them. The train ride to Liverpool, where they would board the ship to New York, was filled with little conversation, but the air between them was charged with anticipation. Holmes sat in silence, his gaze distant, while Watson read the latest medical journal, his thoughts drifting back to the last case they had solved together. As the ship departed from Liverpool's bustling harbor and sailed toward the vast expanse of the Atlantic, the tension between Holmes and Watson was palpable. Holmes had a way of quieting his mind when faced with a new mystery. Yet there was an air of quiet resolve in him now, a feeling that this case would be unlike any they had encountered before. By the time the ship reached Manhattan's harbor, a strange sense of foreboding hung in the air. The towering skyline of the city was visible on the horizon, its lights blinking in the twilight like a constellation of human ambition. Holmes stood at the bow of the ship, his coat billowing in the wind, his eyes narrowed as he surveyed the scene before him. The city seemed to hum with energy, and yet there was an underlying darkness to it, an unspoken tension that only he seemed to perceive. As they disembarked, a figure approached them, tall, well-dressed, and with an air of quiet authority. He introduced himself as Edward Hargrave, the associate mentioned in the letter. His face was calm, but there was something in his eyes, an unease that Holmes immediately noted. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," Hargrave said with a small nod. "I'm afraid we don't have much time. The matter I spoke of is urgent. Please come with me." Without waiting for further questions, Hargrave led them through the crowded streets of Manhattan, weaving through the throngs of people as if guided by some unseen hand. The city was a cacophony of sounds, the clatter of carriage wheels on cobblestone streets, the shouts of street vendors, and the distant hum of conversation. They arrived at an elegant building on the Upper East Side, its marble facade gleaming in the fading sunlight. Hargrave led them through the front door, which opened into a lavish lobby. The scent of polished wood and expensive perfume filled the air. But it was not the luxury of the building that caught Holmes's attention. It was the subtle tension that seemed to pulse in the air, as though the very walls were keeping secrets. "Mr. Marlowe's penthouse is on the top floor," Hargrave said, leading them to a sleek elevator that whisked them upward. As the doors closed, Holmes turned to Watson, his gaze sharp. "Something doesn't sit right with this case, Watson. The invitation, the urgency, it all feels orchestrated. But to what end?" Before Watson could respond, the elevator stopped with a soft chime. The doors slid open to reveal a long hallway, its walls adorned with fine artwork and richly furnished. At the end of the corridor stood a pair of double doors, slightly ajar. Hargrave led them into the room, and what they saw was far from the scene they had expected. The body of Richard Marlowe, the victim, lay sprawled across the floor in a pool of blood. His face was twisted in an expression of terror, and his hand clutched a crumpled letter, one that appeared to be from the same person who had written the invitation. But it was the details of the scene that struck Holmes the hardest. There was no sign of forced entry, yet the apartment had been ransacked, and Marlowe's personal effects seemed deliberately scattered. Holmes stepped forward, his keen eyes scanning the room with the precision of a surgeon. He crouched beside the body, his gloved hands inspecting the victim's fingers, the letter still clutched in his grip. Watson, standing by the door, noticed the uneasy look on Hargrave's face. "This is no ordinary murder," Holmes muttered under his breath. "This is a message." As Holmes carefully examined the scene, Watson remained just inside the door, his gaze flickering from the body to the surroundings. The room itself was tastefully appointed, with opulent furniture and large windows that overlooked a city slowly giving way to the night. Yet despite its beauty, there was an air of unease here, something not quite right. Holmes stood up, his brow furrowing as he turned to Hargrave. "You mentioned the urgency of this case, Mr. Hargrave. Yet there is a strange calm here. How long has the body been discovered?" Hargrave seemed taken aback by the question. "It was found not more than an hour ago. The police are still outside, but I thought you could offer insights before they take full control." Hargrave paused and glanced nervously at the body. "I thought it might be a message." "A message?" Holmes repeated, his tone cool but full of curiosity. "What kind of message?" Hargrave hesitated, clearly unsure of how much to reveal. Mr. Marlowe was not a man without enemies. He was involved in many shady business dealings, though I cannot speak to the full extent of them. But I do know that he had been receiving threatening letters for weeks, letters like the one in his hand. Holmes approached the body again, his movements slow and deliberate. He pried the letter from Marlowe's hand, taking a moment to study the ink, the folds, and the texture of the paper. The writing was in a bold, almost hurried script, as if the writer had been anxious or impatient. "Do you have any idea who might have sent him these threats?" Watson asked, his voice betraying his concern as he looked between Holmes and Hargrave. "I have my suspicions," Hargrave replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "But they are just that, suspicions." Holmes nodded absently, still absorbed in his examination. A man like Marlowe, with so much at stake, would undoubtedly make powerful enemies. "What's intriguing, Watson, is that the letter in his hand is written in the same ink as the letter I received." Watson's eyebrows shot up. "Are you suggesting someone orchestrated this murder to get your attention?" Holmes didn't answer immediately. Instead, he pocketed the letter, his eyes scanning the room once more. He noticed that the rich furnishings, ornate tables, elegant chairs, expensive paintings, had all been disturbed. Drawers had been opened, bookshelves overturned, and the desk where Marlowe had worked was in disarray. The careful ransacking hinted at a purposeful search. Someone had been looking for something specific. There's no sign of forced entry, Holmes murmured. Yet clearly the killer intended to make this look like a robbery gone wrong. He rose from his crouched position and looked toward Hargrave. Tell me, Mr. Hargrave, were there any particular business dealings that might have been tied to this murder? Someone with a vested interest in silencing Mr. Marlowe? Hargrave shifted uncomfortably under Holmes's penetrating gaze. It's hard to say. Marlowe was well known in New York's business circles, wealthy, influential. But he had enemies. Blackstone, for one. Hargrave's voice lowered almost to a whisper. Marlowe and Blackstone had a falling out over a land deal months ago. Blackstone is not a man to be crossed. Holmes's eyes narrowed. Blackstone? Yes, Gregory Blackstone. One of the wealthiest men in Manhattan. He's ruthless. If he thought Marlowe was a threat to his interests, well, that would explain the ransacking, Holmes murmured, standing and turning to Watson. It would seem Marlowe had something Blackstone wanted, something he hoped to find in this apartment. Is that why he was killed? Watson asked. Because of some business deal? I suspect it's more than just business, Holmes replied, his tone thoughtful. Notice the way Marlowe's body was positioned, his expression. It's one of fear, not surprise. This was not a quick death. This was personal. Whoever killed him wanted him to suffer. Hargrave seemed to tense at the mention of Blackstone's name. If you're suggesting Blackstone had a hand in this, Mr. Holmes, I'm suggesting no such thing yet, Holmes interjected quickly. But I believe the answer lies in the missing object. Whatever it was that was so valuable to Mr. Marlowe, and possibly to Blackstone, was taken. Or perhaps never here at all. This murder was a calculated move, Watson, who had been examining a nearby bookshelf, called out. Holmes, there's something odd about this bookcase. He stepped aside to reveal a small, almost imperceptible gap between two volumes. Holmes approached swiftly, noting how the shelf seemed slightly out of place. With a practiced hand, he nudged one of the books, and to their surprise, the entire shelf slid open, revealing a small, hidden compartment. Ah, now we're getting somewhere, Holmes said quietly, crouching down to peer inside. The compartment was empty, save for a few sheets of paper and a small leather-bound journal. He pulled the journal free, dusting it off as he opened it. Inside, the pages were filled with hurried, scrawled notes, some illegible, others in a careful, meticulous hand. It seemed like an account of Marlowe's dealings, and the more Holmes read, the clearer it became that the businessman had been keeping detailed records of people he had crossed. Some names were underlined in red ink. Others had specific annotations next to them, such as dangerous one, do not trust, and may be compromised. This is the key, Holmes murmured, but not yet the answer. He closed the journal with a soft snap and turned back to Hargrave, who had been watching with growing concern. Mr. Hargrave, I suggest you remain calm, but we must act quickly. I want you to arrange a meeting with Blackstone if you can. I will need to speak with him. Hargrave hesitated but then nodded, clearly aware that there was no other choice. I will see what I can do, he said, his voice edged with apprehension. But it won't be easy. Blackstone is a powerful man in this city. If you're wrong about him, if I'm wrong, you'll have nothing to fear. Holmes cut him off. But if I'm right, Mr. Hargrave, we'll have uncovered more than just the identity of the killer. The next few hours passed in a blur. Holmes and Watson made their way back to their temporary lodgings, where Holmes sat, poring over the journal and his notes, piecing together the mystery one fragment at a time. Watson, though far less accustomed to the pressures of such an investigation, couldn't help but admire Holmes's methodical approach. Do you think Blackstone is truly involved? Watson asked as he leaned back in his chair, his eyes weary but keen with curiosity. Holmes didn't answer immediately, but instead he continued to examine the journal. His brow furrowed in concentration. It's difficult to say. Blackstone's name appears frequently in Marlowe's notes, but there is no direct evidence linking him to the murder. Yet. However, the fact that Marlowe kept detailed accounts of his business dealings suggests he feared retaliation. It's a sign of paranoia, yes, but it also speaks to the extent of the danger he was facing. So you're saying this wasn't just a business rivalry? Watson asked. No, Watson, it wasn't. This was a matter of survival. Marlowe had something worth killing for, Holmes said, standing abruptly. And Blackstone may not be the only one who wanted it. There are others in this city who have far more to lose than Marlowe did. That journal is the key to unraveling this, but we need to find out what exactly it was that everyone was looking for. Watson sat back, a feeling of unease creeping over him as the pieces of the puzzle began to take shape. There were dangerous forces at work in this city, ones that didn't simply kill for money or power. No, these were people who would stop at nothing to bury the truth, and it was becoming ever clearer that the truth had been hidden in plain sight all along. The following day, Hargrave came through on his word. He arranged a meeting with Gregory Blackstone in his penthouse office on the Upper West Side. Holmes, Watson, and Hargrave made their way to the towering glass building that overlooked the city. As they entered Blackstone's office, Holmes couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking straight into the lion's den. Blackstone was a tall man, impeccably groomed, with a sharp, calculating gaze. He greeted them with a cool, almost dismissive smile. His appearance was as polished as his reputation. Everything about him screamed power, wealth, and control. But beneath that exterior, Holmes knew, lay a mind capable of ruthlessness. "Mr. Holmes, I understand you have an interest in my business," Blackstone said smoothly as he gestured for them to sit. His voice was low, but it carried an unmistakable edge. "I must admit, I'm curious to know why you've come all the way from London to question me about Richard Marlowe." Holmes gave him a knowing smile. "I don't believe it's a question of curiosity, Mr. Blackstone. I believe you already know why we're here." Blackstone's smile faltered for just a fraction of a second, and that was all Holmes needed. Holmes observed Blackstone intently, noting the slight twitch of his left eyebrow, a betraying sign of discomfort. Despite the man's impeccable exterior, there was something in his demeanor that suggested his calm facade was thinner than it appeared. Holmes could almost see the wheels turning in Blackstone's mind, calculating the best course of action. "Mr. Holmes," Blackstone said again, his voice steady but laced with an unmistakable hint of caution, "I'm afraid I do not follow your line of reasoning. I'm not sure what business you think you have with me regarding Marlowe's death, but I assure you I had nothing to do with it." Holmes leaned back in his chair, folding his hands in front of him with practiced care. His piercing gaze never wavered from Blackstone's face. "Mr. Blackstone, I'm sure you're familiar with the old adage, 'The truth is often hidden in plain sight.'" He let the words hang in the air for a moment. Marlowe's murder was not a random act. It was the culmination of a series of events of which you, I believe, played a significant part. Blackstone's lips curled into a cold smile. "A significant part? Mr. Holmes, I assure you, I was nowhere near Marlowe when he met his untimely end. I had my own dealings to attend to." Holmes's eyes flickered momentarily to Hargrave, who was standing by the door, visibly tense. Hargrave's discomfort was palpable, but Holmes was undeterred. "You see, Mr. Blackstone," Holmes continued, his voice quiet but firm, "the truth I'm looking for doesn't lie in your alibi or in your denials. It lies in your relationship with Richard Marlowe. You two were not just business rivals. You were more deeply entangled than that. Perhaps it was a matter of money, perhaps of power, but I suspect there was something far more personal between you." Blackstone's expression shifted slightly, and Holmes caught it, the briefest flicker of recognition. That was the key. Holmes had struck a nerve. "The land deal, for example," Holmes pressed. "It was more than just a disagreement over property, wasn't it? There was something about it that put Marlowe in direct opposition to you, a deal that went sour, perhaps, but not just for financial reasons." "No, Mr. Blackstone, it was personal. You didn't just lose a deal. You lost something far more valuable, and I intend to find out exactly what that was." Blackstone's mask slipped for the briefest moment, but in that instant, Holmes knew. The man was hiding something deeper, something far darker than simple business rivalry. Blackstone was no stranger to manipulation, but this time Holmes suspected the manipulation had gone too far. "You're delusional," Blackstone spat, his voice suddenly sharp. "You have no proof, no evidence. You think you can come into my city, disrupt my affairs, and somehow deduce my involvement in Marlowe's death? You're grasping at straws." Holmes remained unfazed. His calm demeanor only served to deepen the tension. "I think, Mr. Blackstone, that you are very much aware of how easily a man can be implicated in a crime, even without solid proof. But you also know that I don't operate on assumptions. I deal in facts, not conjecture." He paused, allowing the weight of his words to settle. The fact is, you knew Richard Marlowe better than anyone else. And from what I can gather, that knowledge was more than just business acumen. It was personal. And it was that personal connection that led to his death. Blackstone's jaw tightened. For a moment, the room was thick with silence. It was the kind of silence that preceded the revelation of a truth no one wanted to acknowledge. Finally, Blackstone leaned forward, his eyes narrowing dangerously. "You've got a sharp mind, Holmes," he said, his voice a low growl. "I'll give you that. But there are things in this city you'll never understand, things that go far beyond your little games of deduction and logic." Holmes didn't flinch. He knew the man was attempting to intimidate him. But Holmes had faced far more dangerous foes than Gregory Blackstone. Instead of being swayed, he leaned in slightly, his eyes still locked on Blackstone's. "Perhaps, Mr. Blackstone, but it's not about understanding the city. It's about understanding the people who run it. And from where I stand, you and Marlowe were not merely business rivals. You were part of something much larger, a web of influence, manipulation, and power that extends far beyond your land deals." Hargrave, who had remained silent until now, shifted uneasily. Holmes glanced at him briefly before turning back to Blackstone. "You see, Mr. Blackstone, I believe Marlowe was on the verge of exposing something or someone that would have had a catastrophic effect on your empire. Perhaps it was the land deal, perhaps it was something more. But Marlowe knew too much. And that knowledge, Mr. Blackstone, is what led to his untimely demise." Blackstone's hands clenched into fists, his knuckles whitening. The atmosphere in the room became almost suffocating. For a moment, Holmes wondered if the man might lash out physically. But Blackstone merely sat back, his eyes flickering with a mix of anger and calculation. "You're on dangerous ground, Holmes," Blackstone warned, his voice low and venomous. "You have no idea what you're dealing with. But if you want to continue this charade, fine. But be warned, you might not like where it leads." Holmes remained silent for a beat, letting the tension build. Then, with deliberate slowness, he stood up from his chair and nodded toward Watson and Hargrave. "Very well, Mr. Blackstone. If you prefer to stay in the shadows, that's your prerogative. But I assure you I will find the truth, whether you choose to reveal it or not." Hargrave, clearly relieved that the confrontation was over for the moment, motioned for Holmes and Watson to follow him out of the room. As they made their way back down the elevator, Watson couldn't help but look over at Holmes, who appeared deep in thought. "Do you really think Blackstone is involved?" Watson asked, his voice filled with doubt. Holmes didn't answer immediately. Instead, he gazed out of the elevator windows as they descended, his eyes scanning the city below. "I believe Blackstone is hiding something, Watson, and that something is linked directly to Marlowe's death. But we have yet to uncover the true nature of that connection. It's clear, though, that Blackstone is not the only player in this game." Watson frowned, still unsure of how to piece together the disparate clues. But what could be so important that Marlowe's life was taken? The land deal seems too trivial. Holmes nodded, his expression thoughtful. "It is. There is something else, something deeper, and I believe Marlowe's journal holds the key to unlocking it." As the elevator doors opened, Holmes led the way out of the building, his mind working furiously to piece together the puzzle. The case had taken a darker turn, and with each step he felt the weight of the mystery growing heavier. Whoever was behind Marlowe's death was not acting alone. There were others involved, others with far more to lose than mere business deals. Once outside, Hargrave turned to them with a serious expression. "I'll make arrangements for you to meet with some of Marlowe's closest associates. Perhaps they know something that can help. I'm also going to contact a few people who may have insight into his recent dealings, but we need to act quickly. If Blackstone or someone else is behind this, they won't wait for us to get too close." Holmes nodded, his mind already racing. "I suggest we speak to Marlowe's associates immediately. The longer we wait, the more time our adversaries have to cover their tracks." The three of them made their way to a quiet cafe where they could speak without drawing attention. As they sat down, Holmes immediately began to lay out his thoughts. "It's clear that this murder was not just about money or power, Watson. The people involved in this are playing a game much bigger than that. What we need to uncover is the secret Marlowe was about to reveal. The journal might provide more answers, but it's the names he left behind, the ones marked in red, that are crucial." Watson sat forward, his curiosity piqued. "So the key to solving this isn't just in the motives, it's in the people Marlowe feared most?" Holmes smiled grimly. "Precisely. And it's time we found out who they are." As they set out to meet with Marlowe's associates, the fog of uncertainty that had hung over them began to lift. Each step they took brought them closer to the truth, closer to uncovering the tangled web of lies and power that had led to Richard Marlowe's murder. And with each clue they uncovered, the realization grew clearer. The conspiracy they were uncovering was much larger than any of them had anticipated. The game was no longer just about solving a murder. It was about unmasking a dangerous network that operated in the shadows of Manhattan itself. The pieces were slowly falling into place, but one question remained. Who would they confront next? And how far would the web of deceit stretch before they reached the heart of it all? The city of Manhattan was alive with its usual hum as Holmes, Watson, and Hargrave made their way through the bustling streets. The early evening air carried a chill, yet there was a palpable heat in the atmosphere, the kind of energy that comes from a city brimming with ambition, secrets, and the weight of unspoken power. They were not simply walking through New York anymore. They were treading through a maze of lies, each turn leading them closer to the heart of a mystery that was rapidly growing more complex. After leaving Blackstone's office, Holmes had been deep in thought. His mind whirred with the many possibilities and threads of the case. The tension in Blackstone's eyes had been revealing, but there was still so much more they needed to uncover. Holmes had always known that the trail would be full of distractions and dead ends, but the way the pieces were coming together told him they were close, closer than ever. Hargrave, who had been unusually quiet, cleared his throat as they approached the next building on their list. "This is the office of Marlowe's lawyer, Samuel Whitaker." He was one of the few people close to Marlowe who may have known more about his personal dealings. If anyone had information on what Marlowe was trying to expose, it would likely be Whitaker. Holmes nodded, his pace unhurried. Let's hope Mr. Whitaker is more forthcoming than Blackstone. The man is no stranger to avoiding questions. They entered the building through an imposing door that creaked open on old hinges, and Hargrave led them up a set of grand stairs into a private office on the second floor. The room was neat and professional, with rows of law books lining the shelves and a large polished desk in the center. At the desk sat a middle-aged man with graying hair, dressed in a dark suit. He was reviewing a pile of papers when they entered, but he looked up as soon as he heard their footsteps. "Mr. Hargrave, I presume?" The lawyer's voice was deep and measured, betraying no emotion. He gestured for them to sit. "And Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, what an honor. I understand you're investigating Marlowe's unfortunate death. How may I assist you?" Holmes didn't waste time with pleasantries. "We're trying to understand what Richard Marlowe was involved in before his death. His business dealings, his associates, and any information that might explain why he was targeted." Whitaker paused before answering. Marlowe was a client like any other, important but not unique in his affairs. He had investments, properties, and contacts, but nothing out of the ordinary for a man of his stature. He leaned forward slightly, his tone shifting. "But of course I knew him far better than most. We shared many private conversations, and I was aware of some of his more personal concerns. There was a growing sense of fear in him toward the end." "Fear of whom?" Watson asked, leaning forward. Whitaker hesitated, his eyes darting toward Hargrave as if seeking some kind of permission. Hargrave, who had been standing silently by the door, nodded curtly. "It's safe with them," he said. The lawyer let out a quiet breath as if a weight had been lifted. He was terrified of being exposed, of something coming to light that could ruin him completely. He spoke often of a deal gone wrong. I didn't press him for details, but it was clear that whatever it was eating at him. Holmes raised an eyebrow. "A deal gone wrong. Could you be more specific?" Whitaker shifted uncomfortably in his chair. He had been working with someone on a real estate venture, a deal involving land he had acquired, but the transaction was unconventional. There were a lot of people involved, and Marlowe became convinced that someone was trying to cheat him. "Take the land from under his nose. Someone like Blackstone?" Holmes asked, his voice low but deliberate. Whitaker's eyes flickered briefly, a crack in his calm exterior. Yes, Blackstone had his hands in many ventures in New York. He and Marlowe had crossed paths before, both of them vying for control of the same properties. But it wasn't just Blackstone that Marlowe feared. There were others in the shadows, powerful individuals who had far more to lose if Marlowe exposed them. Who else? Watson pressed, unable to suppress his curiosity. The lawyer took a deep breath. "I'm not sure, but there were whispers of a secret society. People who were above the law, whose dealings were so covert, even the police dared not investigate them. They were the ones Marlowe feared most. Holmes's interest peaked, but he remained composed. A secret society, you say? How intriguing. And you believe Marlowe was involved with them? I don't know, Whitaker replied, his voice now tinged with uncertainty. But he was becoming paranoid. He believed someone was watching him, following his every move. I never took him seriously, but now... He trailed off, his voice faltering. Now it seems he was right. Holmes leaned forward, his mind processing the new information. A secret society? In New York? It sounded like something out of a thriller. But Holmes had learned long ago not to dismiss such things outright. If Marlowe had truly uncovered something that dangerous, it was no wonder someone had silenced him. This society, Holmes continued, did Marlowe say anything else about them? Any names, anything that might lead us to them? Whitaker shook his head. No, he never said a word about it directly. But there were documents, files hidden in his office. He was working on something, trying to gather evidence, but he was afraid someone would break in and take it before he could act. Holmes felt a flicker of hope. Documents, you say? Do you know where they are? The lawyer looked at him, his face pale. I don't, but Marlowe had a safe. In his office. It's possible that whatever he was trying to protect is still there. Holmes stood up, his chair scraping noisily across the wooden floor. I think we should pay Marlowe's office a visit, Watson. If these documents exist, they may hold the answers we've been looking for. Hargrave nodded. I'll make arrangements for us to gain access. But be careful, Holmes. There are people who would stop at nothing to protect their secrets. If Marlowe was killed for what he knew. I'm fully aware of the risks, Mr. Hargrave. Holmes interrupted, his voice steely with determination. But the truth will not remain hidden for long. The three of them left Whitaker's office and headed straight for Marlowe's penthouse. The building was located on the outskirts of the city, nestled among the more luxurious districts, a testament to Marlowe's wealth and ambition. The elevator ride up to the top floor felt unusually long, the air thick with anticipation. As they arrived at the apartment, the mood shifted. The once opulent setting now felt cold and impersonal, as though the life that had occupied it had been erased with a single stroke. Holmes scanned the apartment with the precision of a hawk, noting the subtle signs of disturbance. The police had likely combed through the place, but something about it still didn't sit right with him. We need to find the safe, Holmes said, his voice steady, and we need to do it quickly. Hargrave led them to the back of the room where Marlowe had kept his private study. The area was sparsely decorated except for a large ornate desk and several filing cabinets. Holmes's sharp eyes immediately noted a small inconspicuous panel hidden in the wall. He approached it and ran his fingers along the edges. After a moment's inspection, he turned to Hargrave. This is it. Hargrave opened the panel, revealing a small safe embedded in the wall. Holmes was already at work, examining the lock with the practiced eye of a master detective. There was a moment of tense silence, the air thick with the sense of something about to unfold. Holmes glanced up at Watson, who was watching him with a mix of admiration and nervousness. Ready? Holmes asked, his voice steady. Watson nodded. With a few swift turns and a gentle click, the safe opened. Inside, instead of cash or jewelry, there were several folders, each marked with a different name. Holmes pulled one out and flipped it open. The contents were not what they had expected. It was a series of financial statements, handwritten notes, and cryptic references to meetings, locations, and figures that didn't quite add up. This is it, Holmes said, his voice barely above a whisper. This is what Marlowe was hiding. He spread the papers across the desk, scanning them quickly. It was clear that Marlowe had been investigating something far more dangerous than a mere business rivalry. These were not the records of a businessman. These were the documents of a man who had uncovered something that could topple entire networks of power in the city. The pieces are all here, Holmes murmured. But there's more to this story than just Marlowe and Blackstone. Watson leaned in, his eyes widening as he took in the names and locations on the papers. This isn't just about one man's greed, is it? There are names here, powerful names. Holmes nodded, his fingers tracing the notes. It's bigger than we imagined, Watson. This is only the beginning. As the gravity of their discovery set in, it became clear to all three of them. The deeper they dug, the more dangerous the path would become. Someone didn't want these secrets exposed, and they would stop at nothing to keep them buried. Holmes closed the folder carefully, his expression grim. "We need to find out who's behind this, and fast." The papers lay sprawled across the desk like a map of secrets, their edges creased from repeated handling. Each document Holmes had unearthed seemed to hold a key, but the deeper he probed, the more tangled the threads became. The weight of their discovery was not lost on him. This was not simply a case of murder or a petty business rivalry. What Richard Marlowe had been chasing, what had led him to his death, was something far more insidious. Holmes closed the folder slowly, his brow furrowing in concentration. The names on the pages were of no ordinary individuals. Among them were politicians, business magnates, and even members of law enforcement, figures who could not be touched without shaking the very foundation of the city itself. These people were intertwined in a web that stretched far beyond mere financial dealings, beyond land deals or corporate sabotage. This was a network of power hidden in plain sight. Watson stood quietly beside him, his hands clasped behind his back. "This is bigger than we thought," he said, almost to himself. Marlowe must have uncovered something truly dangerous. Holmes didn't respond immediately. Instead, his eyes scanned the documents once more, taking in the names and connections, the cryptic symbols, and the brief mentions of meetings, locations so remote they seemed to hint at a hidden world existing just beneath the surface of Manhattan. His mind worked in rapid succession, piecing together the scattered details. "Watson," Holmes said at last, his voice low and serious, "we need to locate these people. Whoever is behind this has far-reaching influence, but they made a critical mistake. They underestimated Marlowe's determination. He knew something, and he was close to exposing it." Hargrave, who had been standing off to the side, now stepped forward. His face was drawn, his worry apparent. "What do you intend to do next?" "These are dangerous people, Mr. Holmes. If you confront them without understanding their reach, then we will understand it." Holmes cut him off, his tone firm. "But first we must speak to the one person who might have more information than anyone else, Marlowe's secretary, Eleanor Cross." Hargrave's eyes widened. Eleanor Cross. She was loyal to Marlowe. She was the one person who knew nearly everything about him. But if she's involved in this, if she's in any way connected to... Holmes held up a hand. "We don't know that yet. But she's the next link in the chain, and we need to see what she knows. She was with Marlowe every day. If he had confided in anyone, it would have been her." Eleanor Cross's apartment was located in a quiet, tree-lined street in the heart of the city, a stark contrast to the towering skyscrapers of Manhattan's financial district. Her building was old, its bricks faded with time, but it exuded a sense of quiet dignity. Holmes, Watson, and Hargrave made their way up to the second floor, where Cross's apartment door stood ajar, a thin sliver of light peeking through. Hargrave knocked softly, but there was no response. Holmes stepped forward, his sharp eyes inspecting the door. It was slightly unlatched, the kind of careless mistake a person might make when they were in a rush, or when they didn't expect anyone to be looking for them. Holmes pushed the door open gently, his instincts telling him something was off. The apartment was small, cozy even, but it was clear that it had been ransacked. Drawers were pulled out, papers scattered across the floor, and the once orderly bookshelves were now in disarray. It looked like someone had been searching for something important. "Stay alert," Holmes said quietly, his voice sharp with focus. "She may have been more involved in this than we thought." They moved through the apartment, their steps careful. The living room was empty, but there was a faint smell of burnt paper in the air. Holmes motioned for Watson and Hargrave to check the other rooms as he made his way toward the small study at the back of the apartment. The door to the study was closed, and Holmes approached it cautiously, his senses heightened. He turned the handle slowly, pushing the door open. Inside, the room was a mess, books overturned, paper strewn across the floor. But something caught his eye. At the far side of the room, on a small desk, was a single open book. The pages were smudged with ink, and the handwriting was hurried, almost frantic. Holmes moved toward the desk, his fingers brushing the pages as he began to read. The handwriting was unmistakably Eleanor's, though the words were strange, fragmented. It was a journal entry, and from the looks of it, she had been documenting her own suspicions about Marlowe's dealings, about the people he had been working with, the dangers he had been facing. Marlowe has become obsessed. He believes there is a shadow over him, someone pulling the strings. I've seen him grow more paranoid each day. He won't tell me everything, but I know he's onto something big. He spoke of a man, a figure who never shows his face, someone who controls everything behind the scenes. I can't get close enough to ask him directly. I fear that if I do, I will become a part of the conspiracy I so desperately want to avoid. Holmes scanned the entry with increasing concern. Eleanor had known more than she had let on. She had been aware of the danger but had tried to distance herself from it, even as she watched Marlowe's descent into fear and paranoia. But there was more. The next part of the entry was less coherent. A jumbled mess of names and locations, references to meetings in hidden places. It was clear that she had been trying to make sense of Marlowe's notes, perhaps even trying to warn herself. I can't reach Marlowe anymore. He's gone deeper into it. I fear the worst. I saw them, 3 men in suits. They came to the office today looking for him. I don't know what they want, but I overheard them talking about something important, something to do with the land deal. They're moving fast and they won't stop until they get it. Holmes closed the journal slowly, his eyes narrowing as he processed the implications. The men in suits, the ones who had come for Marlowe, were likely the same individuals behind the web of power that stretched across the city. They were the ones who had silenced Marlowe, and now they were after Eleanor as well. Watson, Holmes said, his voice steady but urgent. We need to find Eleanor. If she's still alive, she knows more than anyone else, but she's clearly in danger. We have to find her before they do. The search for Eleanor took them through the heart of Manhattan, from one lead to the next, each dead end more frustrating than the last. But Holmes's determination never wavered. He was convinced that Eleanor held the final piece of the puzzle, the key to unraveling the entire conspiracy. Their search led them to a small, inconspicuous building tucked away in the city's backstreets, a place where the ordinary business of Manhattan's underworld was conducted. It was here that Holmes and Watson received the tip they had been waiting for. Eleanor had been seen entering the building, though she had not been seen leaving. The building was a low-rise, the kind of structure that didn't draw attention unless you knew exactly what you were looking for. Holmes approached the door with a sense of quiet resolve. It was now or never. He had no doubt that whoever was behind Marlowe's death had a vested interest in keeping Eleanor quiet. If they got to her first, they might never learn the truth. As they entered, the musty air of the building pressed in on them. Holmes led the way, his eyes scanning every shadow, every corner, looking for any sign of Eleanor, or of those who might be after her. They moved quickly, silently through the building's narrow corridors, each step bringing them closer to the truth. At the far end of the hall, they found a door, half open, with a faint light spilling out. Holmes motioned for Watson to stay back as he pushed the door open cautiously. Inside, Eleanor Cross was sitting at a desk, her back to them. She looked pale, drawn, but she was alive. She looked up as they entered, her eyes widening in recognition. There was a mixture of relief and fear in her gaze, as though she had been expecting them, but feared it was already too late. Mr. Holmes, she said quietly, her voice trembling. I knew you'd come, but you shouldn't have if they find out. Eleanor, Holmes interrupted, his voice calm but firm. We need to know what you've uncovered. Marlowe's death wasn't just a robbery gone wrong. This is something much bigger, and you know more than anyone else. Eleanor hesitated, her gaze shifting toward the door, as if expecting someone to burst in at any moment. I can't explain everything, Mr. Holmes, she whispered. But I've seen things I shouldn't have. Marlowe wasn't just involved in land deals. He was close to something far more dangerous. And the people behind it will stop at nothing to keep it hidden. Holmes stepped closer, his voice soft but insistent. Tell us what you know, Eleanor. We need to understand, before it's too late. She nodded slowly as if coming to a decision. There's a meeting tonight.
A final one.
They're going to put an end to this once and for all. If Marlowe didn't survive it, neither will I. As Eleanor spoke, the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. The truth was out there, hidden in plain sight, but now it was a race against time. Eleanor's words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken truth. Holmes leaned forward, his mind racing to piece together the fragments of information she had just provided. The meeting tonight, the one that could seal Marlowe's fate and now Eleanor's, it was the key to everything. He could feel the urgency growing, pressing him forward like an invisible hand on his back. "Tell me everything, Eleanor," Holmes said, his voice calm but insistent. "Who is behind this meeting? What are they planning?" Eleanor's gaze flickered toward the door again, her eyes wide with fear. "I don't know all the details, but I know enough. There's a man. His name is Vincent Darkmore. He's one of the most powerful people in the city, but his influence is shadowy. He's the one who's pulling the strings behind the scenes. He was the one Marlowe was trying to expose. And I think he's the one who ordered the murder." Holmes absorbed this information quickly, his mind working at lightning speed. "Darkmore, a powerful man, you say? But how does he fit into this web of corruption?" Eleanor nodded, her fingers nervously twisting the fabric of her sleeve. "He's been involved in everything. The land deals, the corruption in local government, the secretive meetings. He's been building an empire, one that no one can touch. The meeting tonight is where he plans to finalize everything. The land, the power. Once it's done, he'll control everything, and Marlowe's efforts to stop him will be nothing but a distant memory." Holmes stood up, his eyes narrowing as he processed this new information. "And this meeting, where is it taking place?" Eleanor hesitated. "There's an old mansion outside the city. It's been abandoned for years, but I've heard whispers. They're gathering there tonight. The people Marlowe was investigating, the ones who were supposed to be in control, Darkmore's allies. If I'm right, they'll make their final move tonight. And if they see me, they'll—" She trailed off, her fear evident, but her resolve was clear. "They'll kill me, Mr. Holmes." Holmes's eyes softened, but only for a moment. He turned to Watson and Hargrave, his mind already racing ahead. "We don't have time to waste. Watson, Hargrave, prepare yourself. We're going to that mansion tonight." Hargrave's face paled. "You're not suggesting we go there alone? If Darkmore is as dangerous as you say, we'll need more help." "We can't. We'll need no one else," Holmes interjected, his voice firm, though tinged with an undercurrent of urgency. "This is it, Watson. This is the moment where we'll either expose everything or become part of the hidden world we've been chasing. We cannot afford to fail." The journey to the mansion was tense, the night growing colder as the city faded into the distance. The roads grew more desolate, the buildings sparse, until only the rolling countryside stretched before them. The mansion itself loomed like a shadow in the distance, its silhouette rising against the darkened sky. It was a relic of the past, long abandoned but still imposing, with broken windows and ivy creeping up its crumbling walls. Holmes didn't speak much on the journey. His mind was focused, calculating every possible outcome, preparing himself for whatever they would face. The stakes had never been higher. They were walking into the heart of a conspiracy that reached into the very fabric of the city's power. He could feel the weight of it pressing on him, but it only made him more determined to see it through. As they arrived at the mansion, the air seemed to grow heavier, more suffocating. Holmes led the way, his steps purposeful and confident. Hargrave, though clearly nervous, followed closely behind, his eyes darting about, trying to make sense of the ominous surroundings. The mansion was as eerie up close as it had appeared from afar. The grand doors were wide open, as though inviting them in. The inside was dark, save for the faint light that filtered through the broken windows. The walls were lined with portraits of long-dead aristocrats, their faces frozen in time, their eyes following the trio as they moved through the hallway. Holmes didn't hesitate. He moved with quiet certainty, as if he knew exactly where he was going, though the place was unfamiliar to him. The air was thick with dust and the floorboards creaked underfoot, but Holmes moved as if the mansion were a part of him. "Stay close," he muttered, his voice low. "We're getting closer." They moved deeper into the mansion, down a long hallway that ended in a large set of double doors. The doors were ajar, and beyond them, Holmes could hear the faint murmur of voices. He held up a hand, signaling for them to stop. Through the crack in the door, Holmes peered inside. What he saw sent a chill down his spine. A group of men and women were gathered around a large oval table in the center of the room. Their faces were shadowed in the dim light, but Holmes recognized some of them. There was Gregory Blackstone, the businessman who had been so evasive earlier, and sitting beside him, Eleanor's old boss, Samuel Whitaker, the lawyer. But it was the man sitting at the head of the table that caught Holmes's attention, Vincent Darkmore. He was older than Holmes had expected, his face gaunt, his eyes sharp and calculating. like a predator sizing up his prey. He was speaking in a calm, measured tone, his hands folded before him, as though he were presiding over a private meeting of kings. Holmes didn't need to hear the words to know what was happening. The people in this room were part of the machine, the ones who had been pulling the strings, orchestrating the land deals, the murders, the manipulation. They had built their empire on secrecy and fear, and now they were preparing to cement their control. "We need to act quickly," Holmes whispered, turning to Watson and Hargrave. "We can't wait for the right moment. The time to expose them is now." With a nod, Holmes stepped forward, pushing the doors open silently. The group inside did not notice at first, absorbed in their conversation. But as Holmes crossed the threshold, his voice rang out, cold and commanding. "Good evening, gentlemen and ladies," Holmes said, his voice clear, cutting through the murmur of the room. "I believe you've been expecting me." The room fell into a stunned silence. The faces around the table turned toward him, and Holmes could see the shock followed by unease in their expressions. Darkmore's eyes, however, were unwavering. "I was wondering when you'd show up," Darkmore said, his voice smooth, almost amused. "I must admit I didn't expect you to come so soon. But here you are, Mr. Holmes, and just in time, I see." Holmes stepped further into the room, his eyes never leaving Darkmore. "I came to expose you, Darkmore. To bring your empire of lies into the light. Marlowe was the first to pay the price for your corruption. But I won't let you silence Eleanor, or anyone else for that matter." Darkmore's lips curled into a smile, but it was a smile that sent a shiver down Holmes's spine. "You've always been so clever, Sherlock Holmes. But you're too late. This meeting is already over. You're standing on the edge of something far bigger than you can comprehend." Holmes didn't flinch, though he could feel the gravity of the situation weighing on him. He had no illusions about the danger they were in, but he had come too far to turn back now. "We'll see about that," Holmes said, his voice low and steady. He turned to Watson and Hargrave, signaling them to move forward. "Watson, Hargrave, stay close. We need to get the evidence, and we need to do it now." The tension in the room was thick, and Holmes knew they were walking a fine line between exposing the truth and walking into a trap. Darkmore was no fool, and the people in this room were just as dangerous. But Holmes was confident that the truth was on his side. As the group began to move toward the table, something unexpected happened. The door slammed shut behind them with a loud bang, and the lights in the room flickered, plunging them into darkness. For a moment, everything was still. Then from the shadows a voice rang out, one that was not Darkmore's, but one that was unmistakable. "You're too late, Holmes," the voice sneered. "You've walked right into our trap." Holmes's heart skipped a beat. They had known they were walking into danger, but this was something else. As the lights flickered back on, he could see the smug smiles of the conspirators, and the cold realization dawned on him. They had been expecting him all along. The pieces had finally come together, but now the game was about to take a darker turn. The flickering lights returned with an unsettling hum, casting long, distorted shadows across the room. Holmes stood at the center, his heart racing but his mind as sharp as ever. He could hear the sound of the door closing behind them, the unmistakable sound of a trap being sprung. His instincts screamed at him to move, to act, but he knew better than to give in to the raw rush of adrenaline. They had been prepared for this moment, hadn't they? They knew Darkmore would try something, but this is exactly what I expected, Holmes said, his voice steady and cold as he surveyed the room. He had come this far and wasn't about to back down now. You're all in this together, a network of corruption and manipulation. But you underestimated one thing. Me. For a split second, there was silence, but the smug grins of the conspirators didn't falter. It was Darkmore's voice, cool and calm, that broke the silence. You're deluded, Holmes. You think you can expose us? You think your little games of deduction will unravel the truth? You've walked right into our hands. You were never going to win. Holmes took a step forward, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the room. He could feel the walls closing in, but he wouldn't let fear take hold. You're wrong, Darkmore. It's already too late for you. All your schemes, your lies, it's all unraveling. The truth is coming. I think you'll find it's a little more complicated than that, Darkmore retorted, his voice laced with icy amusement. We've prepared for every possible outcome, Sherlock. You've exposed nothing. You've only made things worse for yourself. Holmes felt his chest tighten. He could sense the dangerous energy in the room, the certainty in Darkmore's words. It was clear now. This wasn't just a battle of wits. This was a battle of survival. But Holmes had one advantage Darkmore had yet to account for: his own relentless pursuit of truth. "No matter the cost, you've made a mistake, Darkmore," Holmes said with deliberate calm, refusing to be intimidated. "You think you control everything, but the truth isn't something you can hide forever. Even if I fall here, someone else will come for you, and your empire of lies will come crashing down." "Maybe," Darkmore replied, his smile never fading, but the glint in his eyes darkened. "But not today." There was something in the way he spoke that made Holmes's senses flare. The trap had been set with a subtle precision, but there was an undercurrent, something off about the way they were being cornered. Darkmore might have thought he had won, but Holmes knew better. The game wasn't over yet. Holmes could hear faint whispers among the conspirators, the quiet murmur of movement from the corners of the room. His gaze flicked to Watson, who stood beside him, every muscle taut. Watson's eyes were trained on the door, his hand instinctively reaching for his pocket as if preparing for the worst. Holmes didn't need to look to know that Hargrave was tense as well, clearly uncomfortable with the unfolding situation. But there was nothing they could do right now but stay focused, to wait for the right moment to strike. As if sensing the shift in the room, Darkmore stepped forward, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "You're not as clever as you think, Holmes. You've made it this far, yes, but now you're trapped. I'll give you credit for one thing. You've been persistent. But there's no escape now. You've no idea how deep this goes." Holmes's mind raced. He wasn't just facing a group of corrupt businessmen and politicians anymore. He was up against a shadowy network that stretched far beyond the bounds of ordinary crime. This wasn't just about Marlowe or the land deal. Darkmore had more to protect, and he'd go to any lengths to ensure it stayed buried. "I know exactly how deep this goes," Holmes replied, his eyes locking with Darkmore's. "It's not just about land. It's about power, control, the ability to pull the strings of the city without anyone knowing. You've been operating in the shadows, but you've made a critical mistake. You underestimated how far I would go to expose you." A flicker of uncertainty passed across Darkmore's face, but it was gone in an instant. "You should have stayed out of it, Holmes. You could have walked away, but now you're part of this, and that's something you'll never escape." Holmes felt his pulse quicken, but his mind remained calm, calculating. The situation was dire, but it wasn't hopeless. He had one last card to play, one final piece of the puzzle. He just had to buy time. "Did you know, Darkmore," Holmes said, his voice shifting, "that Marlowe had something you didn't?" He had a backup plan, a failsafe. The room froze for a heartbeat, as if the very air had thickened with the weight of Holmes's words. Darkmore's eyes narrowed dangerously, and for the first time, Holmes saw a flicker of concern in his steely demeanor. "Tell me what you know," Darkmore hissed, his calm facade cracking just slightly. Holmes didn't respond immediately, instead letting the silence stretch, drawing the tension tighter. "I'm not going to tell you everything," Holmes said softly. "But I will tell you this: Marlowe wasn't working alone. He had allies, people who are very invested in bringing you down." Darkmore's lips curled into a smile, but it was no longer the confident grin of a man in control. There was a hint of desperation beneath it now. "You think you can scare me with empty threats? It's too late for that, Holmes." "But it's not too late for them," Holmes replied, glancing briefly at Watson and then Hargrave. "Marlowe's work has already been passed on. His notes, his documents, they've been distributed. Copies are out there in the hands of people who will make sure your empire crumbles." Darkmore's eyes flared with sudden fury. "You lie," he spat. "You think you can bluff me? You don't have a single piece of proof. Without that, you're nothing." Holmes smiled faintly. "I think you'll find, Darkmore, that I'm not the only one who's been playing this game. But let's see if you're as good at reading the board as you think you are." Before Darkmore could respond, the lights flickered again, and this time, they stayed off, plunging the room into total darkness. A moment of chaos followed. Shuffling feet, hurried whispers, the unmistakable sound of someone moving in the shadows. "Stay close," Holmes barked, his voice slicing through the disarray. "Watson, Hargrave, stay alert. They're trying to make a move." Holmes had anticipated something like this, though the suddenness of it was unsettling. In the darkness, the room was thick with tension, and the conspirators, now aware of the shift in power, began to panic. A low murmur spread through the room, each conspirator unsure of where the threat was coming from. Holmes's mind worked quickly. He could hear the faint sound of footsteps approaching, the shuffle of shoes on the old wooden floor. He wasn't sure where the danger was coming from, but it was clear that they were not alone. Someone had arrived. "Watch the doors," Holmes whispered to Watson, his hand already reaching for his pocket. "We may have visitors." The silence that followed was tense, like the quiet before a storm. Holmes's hand slipped into his coat pocket, feeling for the small, carefully concealed revolver he always carried. It wasn't his preferred method of solving problems, but sometimes you needed a reminder of who was in control. Suddenly, the door on the far side of the room burst open, and in the dim light, Holmes saw a figure step into the doorway. Tall, with a commanding presence, the newcomer's face was hidden in shadow, but there was no mistaking the air of authority about him. Holmes's heart skipped a beat. It was the man he had been anticipating, the one figure who could tie everything together. "You've been busy, Sherlock," the man said, his voice smooth and commanding. "But you're too late." "This is where it ends." Holmes took a step forward, his mind racing. "Who are you?" he demanded, his voice steady, though he knew the answer. He had only ever heard of one man whose power reached as far as Darkmore's, the man behind the entire conspiracy. "My name is Leonard Price," the man said with a cold smile, "and I think it's time you learned who really pulls the strings in this city." A chill ran through Holmes as the name clicked into place. Leonard Price was the missing link, the shadow behind the shadow, the man who had orchestrated it all, the true mastermind. "You've played well, Sherlock," Price continued, his tone condescending. "But now it's time for you to pay the price for your curiosity." Holmes's mind raced. This wasn't over yet. The truth was still out there, and he would find it, no matter the cost. The room was thick with tension, the weight of Leonard Price's presence heavy on Holmes's shoulders. It was as if the very air had changed, becoming more suffocating. Holmes stood motionless, his mind racing, but his expression remained calm, his gaze fixed on Price, whose confident demeanor only served to deepen the mystery. "You've played well, Sherlock," Price said again, his voice dripping with contempt. "But now, it's time for you to pay the price for your curiosity." Holmes didn't flinch. His mind was already working, piecing together the fragments of information he had gathered, understanding the magnitude of what they were facing. Leonard Price was the key, the mastermind behind the entire network of corruption that had ensnared Marlowe, Eleanor, and countless others. It all made sense now, the way everything had been orchestrated from the shadows. "You," Holmes began, his voice steady despite the uncertainty gnawing at the edges of his thoughts, "are the one who has been controlling everything. The land deals, the murders, the web of power. You built it, and you've been manipulating everyone like pawns in a game." Price smiled, a slow, calculated grin. "You finally understand. Marlowe was a fool to think he could stop me. He didn't have the foresight, the knowledge, the patience. He thought he could expose me, but in the end, he was nothing more than a nuisance. And now, so are you." Holmes's mind worked furiously, sifting through the pieces. He could see it now. Price wasn't just a businessman. He wasn't just some criminal mastermind. No, he was far worse. A man who had used the city's power structures to create a network of control, one that ran deeper than anyone had realized. This wasn't just about greed or power. This was about a carefully constructed empire built on fear and manipulation. But there was something Price had overlooked: Holmes's relentless pursuit of truth. There was one final piece, a detail that had been right under his nose the entire time. "You underestimated Marlowe," Holmes said, his voice gaining strength. "He wasn't just working with Eleanor. He had a backup plan, a failsafe. And now I know where it is." Price's smile faltered slightly. "You think you've won?" he sneered. "It's over. You have nothing. You've been chasing shadows." "Not shadows," Holmes retorted, his eyes narrowing. "Evidence. Marlowe's notes. His journal. They've already been distributed in part. Copies are out there, copies that will expose everything. You think you've covered your tracks, but you're wrong." Price's posture stiffened. The confident facade he had worn for so long began to crack, his eyes flashing with something akin to panic. He hadn't expected Holmes to have gotten this far. He hadn't expected anyone to be capable of unraveling the labyrinth he had so carefully constructed. But Holmes had done just that, piece by piece. "Do you really think you can stop me, Holmes?" Price asked, his voice laced with menace. "The people I work with, they own this city. They're untouchable. I don't need to stop you, Price, Holmes said, his voice cutting through the tension like a knife. You've already lost. The moment you killed Marlowe, you made sure the truth would come out. You may have thought you were pulling the strings, but in reality, you were the puppet. And now the truth will be exposed. It's only a matter of time before the rest of your empire crumbles. Price's expression twisted in fury. You think it's that easy? That you can just waltz in here and expose everything? You think the people who've helped me will just let you walk away? Holmes didn't flinch. I don't care about your allies, Price. They're as much a part of this as you are. You'll all be exposed. The land deals, the manipulation, the murder, it all leads back to you. And when the truth comes to light, no one will be able to protect you. Price's lips curled into a cruel smile. You're naive, Holmes. You think you're the first to try? Many before you have tried, and they've failed. They've all failed. But they weren't me, Holmes said, his voice quiet but unwavering. And you made the mistake of underestimating me. The truth will come out, and when it does, your empire will fall. For a moment, there was silence in the room. The conspirators around the table exchanged uneasy glances. Holmes could see the uncertainty beginning to spread, the realization that their carefully constructed world was on the verge of collapse. Then, without warning, the sound of footsteps echoed in the hallway. The door to the mansion burst open, and a group of figures emerged from the shadows, stepping into the room. Holmes's heart raced. He knew these people. At least he recognized some of them from the brief mentions in Marlowe's notes. They were the ones who had been behind the land deals, the ones who had been operating in the shadows. But it wasn't just them. Among the new arrivals, one figure stood out. Tall, composed, and unmistakably familiar. Eleanor. Holmes felt a surge of relief wash over him, followed quickly by a sharp rush of curiosity. She was here, alive, but why? Eleanor, Holmes said, his voice calm, though his mind was swirling with questions. Eleanor met his gaze, and for a moment, there was a flicker of hesitation in her eyes. But then she stepped forward, her posture confident. I'm not here to stop you, Holmes, she said, her voice steady but filled with a strange, quiet power. I'm here to help you. Price's face twisted with disbelief. You're working with him? He spat, his voice full of venom. After everything I did for you? Eleanor didn't flinch. No, Price, you never did anything for me. You manipulated me, used me for your own ends. But not anymore. Holmes turned to Eleanor, his mind spinning with the new revelation. You've been working with Price all along. No, she said, her voice firm. I was never really part of this. I knew what I had to do. Marlowe wasn't the only one who knew about your plans, Price. He wasn't the only one you underestimated. Price's eyes narrowed, his fury palpable. You think you can bring me down? You think you've won? Eleanor shook her head. I don't think I've won. I know I have. This is the end for you, Price. The end of your empire. Holmes's mind was already racing, piecing together the final fragments. Eleanor hadn't been working with Darkmore or Price. She had been playing her own game. She had always known the stakes, and she had been waiting for the right moment to expose everything. She had been the one who had passed along the crucial information, the missing piece of the puzzle that Marlowe had been working on. As the others in the room looked on in stunned silence, Holmes finally allowed himself a brief smile. You did it, Eleanor, he said softly, his voice full of admiration. You've been the key to exposing all of this. She nodded, her expression serious. I knew the truth would come out. It always does. Price, realizing the game was up, took a step back, his eyes darting around the room. You think you've won? This isn't over. You can't stop me. He won't survive this. Holmes took a step forward, his expression unwavering. You're right about one thing, Price, it's not over. But it will be for you. The truth always finds its way out, no matter how hard you try to bury it. Eleanor stepped to the side, allowing Holmes and Watson to move toward the table where the documents lay scattered. Holmes grabbed a handful of papers, copies of the notes Marlowe had hidden, records of the land deals, and names that tied Darkmore and Price to every major corruption scandal in the city. This was the evidence they had all been waiting for. The final piece to expose the entire network. Price's eyes widened as he realized what Holmes was holding. No, you can't. It's already done, Price, Holmes said. These documents will be seen by the right people. The truth is already out. With that, Holmes turned to face the rest of the room, the weight of the moment settling in. The final pieces of the puzzle had fallen into place. Price's empire of lies, built on manipulation and murder, had been exposed for what it truly was. The truth would come to light, and the city would never be the same. Price, realizing there was no way out, glared at Holmes one last time, his face contorted in rage and frustration. But even he knew it was over. Holmes turned to Eleanor, giving her a nod of thanks. "You did well." She smiled, the weight of everything she had carried for so long finally lifting from her shoulders. It was the right thing to do. Marlowe would have wanted this. The room was still, the finality of the moment sinking in. Price's empire had crumbled, the last of his allies in the room silenced by the undeniable truth. Holmes knew this was only the beginning of a much larger investigation, but for now, he allowed himself a brief moment of satisfaction. The truth had come out. As the authorities were called, Holmes, Watson, and Eleanor stood together, knowing that the fight wasn't over, but for now the darkness that had haunted the city for so long had been pushed back, if only for a brief moment, and in that silence, in that fleeting victory, Holmes couldn't help but smile. The game, after all, was far from over,